All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to build the body's command center, the nervous system, from the absolute ground up. The goal here is to give you a really clear visual map of how it all works, so you can literally picture the pathophysiology step by step when you're sitting in your exam.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the big picture, the system's overall design. Then, we're going to zoom way into a single neuron in the synapse. That's where all the magic happens. After that, we'll see what happens when a nerve gets injured, and then we'll zoom all the way back out to the main headquarters, the brain. Let's dive in.
First up, the grand design. I want you to think of this as the master blueprint for your body's entire internal network. This is the wiring that controls absolutely everything, from your deepest thoughts to the beat of your heart.
So the whole system is really split into two main parts. First, you've got the central nervous system, the CNS. That's the command center, the brain and spinal cord, all tucked away safely inside our bones. And then, branching out from there, you have the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. These are like the network cables, all the nerves that connect the command center to every single part of your body.
So, how does this massive network actually do its job? Well, to understand that, we need to zoom right in on the fundamental building block, the single cell that makes it all happen, the neuron.
Just look at this cell. It's perfectly designed for its job, isn't it? A signal comes in through these little branches, the dendrites, kind of like antennas. It gets processed here in the cell body, and then, bam! A new signal shoots down this long cable, the axon, to pass the message on. It's a perfect one-way street for information.
Now that long axon cable is often wrapped in something called a myelin sheath. The easiest way to picture this, just think of the rubber insulation on an electrical wire. It's this fatty layer that keeps the electrical signal from leaking out and losing its power as it travels down the line. And the key takeaway here, the most important thing to remember, is simple. Myelin equals speed. Because of this insulation, the signal doesn't just flow smoothly down the wire. Instead, it literally leaps from one gap in the sheath to the next. It's a process called saltatory conduction, and it makes the communication incredibly, ridiculously fast.
And this right here is exactly why myelin is a must-know concept for your exams. In demyelinating diseases, like multiple sclerosis, the body's own immune system attacks this myelin sheath. As that insulation breaks down, the nerve signals slow to a crawl or just stop altogether. And that right there is the direct cause of the symptoms of the disease. It's a short circuit.
Okay, so how does that super fast electrical signal get from the end of one neuron to the beginning of the next one? You might think they're directly connected, like two wires twisted together, but they're not. There's this teeny tiny gap between them, and the signal has to make a jump. That critical junction point is called the synapse.
Let's walk through this step by step. First, the electrical signal zips down and arrives at the end of the axon. That arrival triggers the release of these little chemical messengers, which we call neurotransmitters. They float across that tiny gap, they lock into receptors on the next neuron, and that action creates a brand new electrical signal. It's an amazing conversion, electrical to chemical and right back to electrical again.
And these chemical messengers are so important. When you have an imbalance, it's directly linked to major health conditions. For instance, problems with acetylcholine are tied to the muscle weakness in myasthenia gravis. The loss of dopamine-producing cells, that's what causes the motor symptoms of Parkinson's. And serotonin levels are famously involved in things like depression and schizophrenia.
So what happens when one of these peripheral nerves, one of the cables, gets damaged or even cut? Well, unlike in the brain and spinal cord, these peripheral nerves have this remarkable, though limited, ability to try and repair themselves. Let's watch how that whole process plays out. Okay, so when a nerve is severed, the part of the axon that's now cut off from the main cell body, well, it can't survive. It dies off in this really predictable step-by-step process. The axon swells up and breaks apart, the myelin disintegrates, and then this cleanup crew of immune cells called macrophages comes in to get rid of all the debris. But here's the crucial part. The Schwann cells that made the myelin stick around and form a little tunnel to guide any potential regrowth.
And this slide just shows the two possible outcomes perfectly. On the top, you see the successful path. The healthy axon starts to sprout, it finds that guiding tunnel made by the Schwann cells, and it successfully reconnects with the muscle. Awesome. But on the bottom, you see what happens when it fails. If scar tissue gets in the way or the gap is just too big, the new growth gets all messy and disorganized, no connection is made, and the muscle just withers away.
All right, let's pull the camera all the way back out.
We've seen the individual wires and the tiny connections. Now let's look at the central processing unit where billions of these signals are managed every single second, the brain.
So we can actually map the brain's wrinkly outer layer, the cortex, into different functional zones. Generally speaking, you've got the frontal lobe, right up front, handling things like planning and your personality. The parietal lobe processes sensory stuff like touch and space. The occipital lobe, way in the back, is all about vision, and the temporal lobes on the sides are key for hearing and for memory.
Now for your exams, it is absolutely critical that you know the difference between two key speech centers. Broca's area, that's in the frontal lobe, and it's all about the motor part of speech, physically forming the words. Think Broca's, broken speech. Then you have Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe. That's about the sensory side, understanding language. So if that's damaged, someone might say, Wernicke, what? Because they can't understand. Damage to Broca's means you have trouble producing speech. Damage to Wernicke's means you have trouble understanding it.
And this brings us to this kind of weird-looking guy. This is a classic neurology concept called the motor homunculus. It's basically a map of our motor cortex. And the key thing to get here is that the size of each body part isn't based on its actual physical size. It's based on how much brain power is needed for its fine motor control. That's why the hands and the face are absolutely enormous here. They need the most precise, complex movements.
And that all brings us to this one big question. In a network this complex, with 86 billion neurons, what happens when just one critical pathway fails? By understanding the fundamental structure we've walked through today, from the neuron to the synapse to the brain, you now have the framework you need to answer that question and to really master the pathophysiology of the entire neurologic system.